the heart of the great Himalayas, straddling the border between Nepal and Tibet, stands a peak of such staggering scale that it pierces the very edge of the sky. To the Nepali people, it is Sagarmatha, the goddess of the sky. To the Tibetans, it is Chomolungma, the Holy Mother. To the rest of the world, it is Mount Everest, a name that has become synonymous with the ultimate challenge, the pinnacle of earthly ambition. It is a place of sublime, crystalline beauty, a three-sided pyramid of black rock and brilliant white ice set against a cobalt blue sky. It's a sight that has captivated people for centuries, a true wonder of the natural world. I'd love to know where you're listening from today and what time it is for you, so please feel free to leave a comment. And if you enjoy stories about adventure, history, and the limits of human endurance, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when our future tales are released. For as breathtaking as this mountain is, its beauty is a deceptive veil. It rises to an elevation of 8,848 meters. That's over 29,000 feet, into a realm where the air is too thin to sustain life, where the temperatures are more fitting for the surface of another planet, and where the forces of nature operate with an indifference that is both absolute and terrifying. This is not a story of heroic conquest, but a cautionary tale woven from science, history, and the unforgiving laws of physiology. It is a detailed account of what happens to the human body and mind when they dare to enter this lethal environment without the armor of extensive training, meticulous planning, and profound respect. This is the story of why a person would not and could not survive a climb of Mount Everest without proper preparation. The magnetic pull of Everest did not begin with a climber's dream, but with a mathematical calculation in a quiet office in India. For centuries, the mountain was just one of many sacred peaks, a home for the gods, remote and unmeasured. But in the mid-19th century, the British Empire, in its ambition to map its vast territories, was undertaking the Great Trigonometrical Survey, a colossal project to measure the entire Indian subcontinent. In 1852, a Bengali mathematician named Radhanath Sikdar, working as a chief computer, was analyzing data from the field when he discovered that a distant peak, initially labeled simply as Peak 15, was higher than any other measured on Earth. For several years, the result was meticulously checked and rechecked, until in 1856, the superintendent of the survey, Andrew Waugh, officially announced that Peak 15 stood at 29,002 feet, or 8,840 meters, a remarkably accurate measurement for the time. Overruling his own policy of retaining local names, Waugh named the mountain after his predecessor, Sir George Everest. It was a controversial decision, as the mountain already had its ancient names, Sagarmatha and Chomolungma, but the Western name stuck, and with it came a new identity. It was no longer just a sacred place. It was now a target, a geographical absolute, the highest point on the planet. This declaration ignited a new kind of ambition. By the early 20th century, the North and South Poles had been reached. The blank spaces on the world map were being filled in. For the adventurous spirit of the age, particularly within the British Empire, there remained one great, unclaimed prize: the third pole. To climb Mount Everest became more than a mountaineering challenge. It was a matter of national prestige, a symbol of human dominance over the natural world. Yet, the mountain remained fiercely guarded, not just by its extreme altitude, but by politics. The kingdoms of Nepal and Tibet were closed to foreigners, turning the peak into a forbidden fortress. It took years of delicate diplomacy by British officials like Sir Charles Bell, who cultivated a personal friendship with the 13th Dalai Lama, to finally secure permission for a British expedition to approach the mountain from the Tibetan side in 1921. This first expedition was purely for reconnaissance. Its members, clad in tweed jackets and hobnail boots, had no reliable maps. Their initial task was simply to find a viable path to the base of the great mountain. A grueling trek of over 300 miles, or nearly 500 kilometers, just to begin their survey. Leading figures on these early attempts included the enigmatic George Mallory, a school teacher and gifted climber who, when famously asked why he wanted to climb Mount Everest, gave the immortal reply, "Because it's there." Mallory embodied the romantic, almost poetic soul of early mountaineering. He was less concerned with conquering the peak than with the purity of the struggle itself. In 1922, a second expedition returned, this time with the intention to climb. They also brought a controversial new technology: bottled oxygen. To many climbers, including Mallory initially, using English air, as it was called, felt like cheating, a violation of the spirit of the endeavor. Yet, the physical reality of the mountain was undeniable. At extreme altitudes, the body is starved of oxygen, and every step becomes an act of supreme will. They pushed higher than anyone had before, but the expedition ended in tragedy when a devastating avalanche thundered down the slope, killing 7 Sherpa climbers. It was the mountain's first brutal lesson. It does not distinguish between ambition and folly, and it demands a heavy price for any misstep. The final and most legendary of these early attempts came in 1924. This time, Mallory was joined by a young, brilliant engineering student from Oxford named Andrew "Sandy" Irvine. Irvine was not the most experienced climber on the team, but he was immensely strong and possessed a genius for mechanics, making him the ideal partner to manage the temperamental oxygen apparatus. On the 8th of June, 1924, Mallory and Irvine made their bid for the summit. The expedition's geologist, Noel Odell, climbing in support far below them, looked up at a moment when the clouds parted. He saw two tiny black dots moving steadily up the final rocky ridge, approaching the feature now known as the second step. In his diary, he wrote that they were going strong for the top. Then, the mists swirled back in, and the two men were never seen alive again. Their disappearance became one of the greatest mysteries in the history of exploration. Did they reach the summit? A full 29 years before the official first ascent? Did they fall on the way up, or on the treacherous descent? The mystery deepened the mountain's legend, transforming it from a mere geographical feature into a timeless monument to human courage and sacrifice. For decades, the question hung in the air, a ghost on the upper slopes. Then, in 1999, an American expedition discovered George Mallory's body, remarkably preserved by the ice and cold, lying on a slate gray slope at over 26,000 feet, about 8,000 meters high. The body bore signs of a fatal fall, but the mystery remained. In his pocket was a list of supplies, letters from home. But what was missing was a photograph of his wife, Ruth, which he had promised to leave on the summit. The photo was gone, leaving the world to wonder forever. After the Second World War, the world changed. China's invasion of Tibet closed the northern approach that Mallory had pioneered, and for a time, it seemed the mountain was once again sealed off. But soon after, the Kingdom of Nepal cautiously began to open its borders, revealing the southern approach through the Khumbu Valley. The challenge was taken up again, this time with a new sense of purpose and a vastly different approach. The romantic, almost amateurish spirit of the 1920s gave way to a more scientific and meticulously planned methodology. The culmination of this new era was the 1953 British expedition, led by Colonel John Hunt. It was a massive undertaking, organized with military precision. They had superior equipment, better designed oxygen sets, warmer clothing made of nylon and down, and a deeper, more scientific understanding of acclimatization. Among its members were a lanky beekeeper from New Zealand named Edmund Hillary, whose quiet demeanor masked an iron will and incredible stamina, and a veteran Sherpa climber named Tenzing Norgay. Tenzing was not merely a guide. He was one of the most experienced high-altitude mountaineers in the world, having already attempted Everest 6 times. He possessed an intuitive understanding of the mountain that no foreigner could match. Together, Hillary and Tenzing formed the expedition's strongest partnership. On May 29, 1953, after a teammate had been forced to turn back just a few hundred feet from the top, they made their final push. They navigated the treacherous Khumbu icefall, climbed the sheer Lhotse face, and established their final camp high on the southeast ridge. From there, they faced their last great obstacle, a formidable 40-foot or 12-meter rock wall that had never been climbed before. In an incredible feat of skill and trust, Hillary wedged his way up a crack in the rock, and Tenzing followed. Today, it is known as the Hillary Step. A short while later, at 11:30 in the morning, they stepped onto the summit of the world. The Siren's call had finally been answered. The success of Hillary and Tenzing, set against the haunting tragedy of Mallory and Irvin, cemented the mountain's dual identity, a place of ultimate triumph, but also a graveyard for those who underestimate its power. This rich and often tragic history is the foundation of Everest's allure, drawing countless people to follow in these famous footsteps, often without fully grasping the profound lessons that were written in the ice by those who came before them. For our unprepared climber, the journey to Everest does not begin at the base of the mountain, but on a tiny propeller plane making its final approach to one of the most dangerous airports in the world. The Siren's call of history has drowned out the quiet voice of reason, and they are here, in the heart of Nepal, filled with a dangerous cocktail of ambition and ignorance. After the chaotic, sensory overload of Kathmandu, the flight to Lukla is a jarring transition. The plane weaves through colossal green valleys, with terraced hillsides dropping away thousands of feet below. Then, through the cockpit window, a sliver of asphalt appears, seemingly plastered onto the side of a mountain. This is the Tenzing Hillary Airport, a runway just over 520 meters, or about 1,700 feet. Long, sloped dramatically upwards to help slow landing aircraft. There is no room for error. The plane touches down with a jolt, roars up the incline, and comes to an abrupt stop just shy of a stone wall. The doors open, and the first breath of Khumbu air hits the lungs. It is thin, crisp, and cold. For our climber, this terrifying landing feels like the first victory, a confirmation of their own daring. They are oblivious to the fact that they have just been delivered to the doorstep of a world that operates on a completely different set of rules. Rules that are biological, not personal. The trek to base camp begins. The path descends from Lukla, winding through pine and rhododendron forests, a deceptively gentle start. Our climber, flush with adrenaline and a misplaced sense of fitness honed at sea level, sets a blistering pace. They stride past local Sherpa porters who carry astonishing loads with a steady, unhurried rhythm. And they grow impatient with the slow, deliberate pace of their own guide. The trail follows the Dudh Koshi River, a roaring torrent of milky, turquoise water fed by the glacial melt from high above. They cross spectacular suspension bridges, draped in a rainbow of prayer flags that flutter in the wind, each one carrying a mantra out into the world. They pass ancient mani stones, intricately carved with Buddhist prayers, silent testaments to centuries of devotion. The beauty is overwhelming, but our unprepared climber sees it only as a backdrop for their great adventure. They are a tourist here, not a pilgrim, and they fail to understand that this landscape is not a park. It is a high-altitude wilderness that demands respect and, above all, patience. The first critical error is made within hours. The guide, a man whose family has lived in these mountains for generations, counsels a slow pace. Slowly, slowly, he says. Bistari, bistari. This is the first and most important lesson of the Khumbu, the key to survival. The process is called acclimatization, and it is the body's remarkable but gradual adaptation to the thinning air. As you ascend, the atmospheric pressure drops, meaning that for every breath you take, you pull in fewer molecules of oxygen. This state, known as hypoxia, is the single greatest threat to life on Everest. To compensate, the body must undergo a series of profound changes. It begins to produce more red blood cells to carry what little oxygen is available more efficiently. Your breathing rate increases even at rest. And at night, many trekkers experience a strange, alarming pattern of breathing called Cheney Stokes, where they gasp for air in their sleep as the brain's respiratory centers struggle to adjust. This entire process is a delicate biological negotiation with the mountain, and it cannot be rushed. The golden rule is to climb high, sleep low, ascending to a new altitude during the day, but returning to a lower elevation to sleep, giving the body time to catch up. Our climber, however, sees this as a frustrating delay. They feel strong. The descent from Lukla has given them a false sense of security. They push on, ignoring the guide's advice, eager to make up time. After passing through the village of Manjo and officially entering Sagarmatha National Park, the trail presents its first true challenge, the infamous Namche Hill. It is a grueling, relentless ascent of 600 meters, nearly 2,000 vertical feet, up to the bustling Sherpa capital of Namche Bazaar. For the first time, the altitude makes its presence truly known. The lungs burn as if breathing fire. The heart hammers against the ribs. Every step is a monumental effort. Our climber, accustomed to pushing through pain in a gym, does so again, gritting their teeth and driving their legs. They arrive in Namche Bazaar, exhausted, gasping, but triumphant. And that evening, the first symptom appears, a dull, persistent headache. They dismiss it as dehydration, take a painkiller, and drink some water, unaware that this is the first whisper of acute mountain sickness, or AMS. It is their body's initial, desperate warning signal that it is not coping with the rapid ascent. Namche Bazaar is a remarkable amphitheater of houses carved into the mountainside at an altitude of 3,440 meters, or 11,286 feet. It is the cultural and economic hub of the Khumbu, a vibrant meh of trekkers, climbers, and Sherpa traders. Here, a prepared expedition would spend at least 2 nights, including an acclimatization day. This is not a rest day in the traditional sense. It involves a short but strenuous hike up to a higher altitude, perhaps to the Everest View Hotel, for the first breathtaking glimpse of the great peak, before returning to Namche to sleep. This adheres to the climb high, sleep low principle, gently coaxing the body to adapt. Our impatient climber resents this pause. They feel trapped. The headache is still there, a low hum of discomfort. But the view of Everest in the distance only fuels their summit fever. They see the rest day as a waste of precious time and money. They do not comprehend that this day is as crucial to their survival as any rope or ice axe. They are buying a lottery ticket, and the price of that ticket is time, but they refuse to pay it. As the trek continues beyond Namche, the world changes. The lush forests give way to a stark, beautiful, but unforgiving alpine desert. The air grows colder and thinner with every upward step. The trail passes through villages like Tengboche, home to a magnificent monastery where climbers have long sought blessings for a safe passage. Our climber might take a photo, but they do not feel the deep spiritual connection to the mountains that is woven into the fabric of Sherpa life. For them, the mountain is an opponent, an obstacle to be overcome. For the Sherpa, it is a deity that must be appeased. The physical toll is now mounting relentlessly. The headache is no longer a dull ache, but a pounding throb. They feel a persistent nausea and a profound lethargy. They have lost their appetite, forcing down meals that taste like cardboard. At night, they cannot sleep, their frantic breathing pattern leaving them exhausted and unrefreshed by morning. These are not signs of fatigue. They are the classic, screaming symptoms of moderate AMS. Their body is failing the most basic test. Their guide watches with a growing sense of dread, recognizing a dangerous pattern he has seen too many times before. The final push to base camp is a journey through an alien landscape, past the memorials for climbers who have perished on the mountain, a somber reminder of the stakes. The trail skirts the edge of the vast, rubble-strewn Khumbu Glacier. The world is reduced to shades of gray rock and brilliant white ice. Finally, after days of punishing effort, our climber stumbles into the chaotic, sprawling tent city of Everest Base Camp, perched on the moving ice of the glacier itself. At an altitude of 5,364 meters, or 17,598 feet. For a well-prepared climber, this is a moment of profound awe, the culmination of a long and respectful pilgrimage. It is the end of the beginning. But for our unprepared climber, it is simply the end. They have arrived, but they are a wreck. They are dehydrated, sleep-deprived, and severely under-acclimatized. Their blood is thick and sludgy from dehydration. Their brain is subtly swelling against the inside of their skull, and fluid may already be starting to accumulate in their lungs. They stand at the foot of the giants, looking up towards the next great challenge, the treacherous Khumbu Icefall, believing their real climb is about to begin. They could not be more wrong. Their climb is already over. They have failed the first and most fundamental test of the mountain, a test not of strength or endurance, but of humility and patience. They have reached the gateway, but in their ignorance, they have already sealed their own fate. Everest Base Camp is a temporary, high-altitude city built on a foundation of shifting ice. It is a place of contradictions, of roaring gas generators, and silent, solemn meditation, of bright, primary-colored tents pitched against a monochrome landscape of rock and glacier. For a properly prepared team, base camp is a crucial hub for rest, strategy, and further acclimatization before pushing higher. Days are spent in a disciplined rhythm, checking equipment, practicing rope skills on the glacier's edge, eating high-calorie meals to combat the body's altitude-induced wasting, and taking short hikes to slightly higher elevations before returning. It is a place of nervous energy, but it is controlled and purposeful. Our unprepared climber, however, experiences none of this. Their world has shrunk to the throbbing prison of their own skull. The nausea is constant. and the beautiful, cathedral-like peaks that surround them, including the jagged summit of Pumuri and the sheer wall of Nuptsa, seem to mock their suffering. They see the other climbers, focused and efficient, and feel a pang of resentment. They mistake this disciplined patience for inaction, still failing to grasp that the real battle, the internal, physiological one, is already being waged, and they are losing decisively. Looming directly above the camp is the first great gatekeeper of the southern route, the Khumbu Icefall. It is not a wall to be climbed in the traditional sense, but a 2,000-foot, or over 600-meter, high frozen waterfall in excruciatingly slow motion. The Khumbu Glacier, born in the high, silent valley known as the Western Combe, is funneled down this steep, narrow section of the mountain. The pressure forces the river of ice to buckle and shatter, creating a chaotic, three-dimensional labyrinth of ice blocks the size of small buildings. These towers, called seracs, lean at impossible angles, their foundations constantly being ground away by the glacier's inexorable movement. The entire icefall moves at a staggering rate of 3 to 4 feet, or about 1 meter every single day. The ground beneath one's feet is not solid. This is why the icefall is arguably the most objectively dangerous section of the entire climb. It is not a matter of skill or strength alone. It is a game of Russian roulette, where the odds are only slightly improved by speed and experience. The route through this frozen chaos is not permanent. Each climbing season, a small, elite team of highly skilled Sherpas, known as the Icefall Doctors, are the first to enter the maze. With an almost supernatural understanding of the ice, they scout and establish the safest possible path. This involves fixing miles of rope and bridging the gaping, seemingly bottomless crevasses with a series of rickety aluminum ladders. These ladders might be laid flat to span a terrifying void, or they might be lashed together vertically to scale a sheer wall of blue ice. The Icefall Doctors work in this perilous environment for weeks, maintaining the route as the glacier's constant movement shatters old paths and opens new dangers. Their courage is legendary, and their work makes the passage possible for the paying clients who follow. For our unprepared climber, standing at the base and looking up, the icefall is a terrifying, abstract spectacle. They see the ropes and ladders as a simple convenience, a kind of high-altitude stairway, rather than the tenuous lifeline that it truly is. The attempt begins in the dead of night, around 2 a.m. The bitter cold is the climber's ally, for it freezes the icefall into its most stable state. The headlamps of dozens of climbers form a string of bobbing lights, a fragile constellation against the immense darkness. From the very first step, our climber is in trouble. Their hands, clumsy with cold and thick gloves, struggle with the simple metal clips of their harness. Attaching their ascender, or jumar, to the fixed rope is a fumbling, awkward process. They step onto the ice, and the sharp points of their crampons, which should feel like a secure extension of their feet, feel alien and unstable. Every crunch of steel on ice echoes their own fragility. Their movements are jerky and inefficient. The headache that has plagued them for days now pulses in time with their frantic heartbeat, and their vision has a subtle, tunnel-like quality, a sign of their brain's desperate, oxygen-starved state. Soon they reach the first ladder. It spans a crevasse so deep that its bottom is lost in an abyss of pure black. The ice on either side is a mesmerizing, crystalline blue. The guide demonstrates the technique. Clip your safety line to the rope above, hold the handrails, and walk across deliberately, placing your cramponed boots carefully on the rungs. For a trained climber, this is a moment of intense focus. For our climber, it is a moment of pure terror. They get down on their hands and knees, their heart trying to beat its way out of their chest. The ladder flexes and bounces under their weight. Their crampons scrape and catch on the metal rungs, threatening to trip them with every move. They dare not look down into the void, but they can feel its cold breath on their face. They are expending a massive amount of energy, not just physically, but emotionally, burning through reserves they will desperately need later. Deeper into the icefall, the path winds between the seracs. These are not silent, static towers. The glacier groans, creaks, and cracks with sounds like nearby thunder. It is the sound of the mountain breathing, shifting its weight. To be inside the icefall is to feel infinitesimally small and vulnerable. A trespasser in a realm of titanic, unstable forces. Our climber is now moving dangerously slow. Their lack of acclimatization means they have to stop for breath every few steps. Their inefficiency on the ropes creates a bottleneck, frustrating the climbers behind them. The sun begins to rise, and what should be a moment of sublime beauty, the first light catching the summit of Everest in a blaze of orange and pink, is instead a signal of escalating danger. The warmth of the sun acts as a trigger. The ice begins to melt. The frozen glue holding the seracs together begins to weaken. The thunderous cracks become more frequent, more immediate. The end comes without malice or drama. It is a simple matter of physics. While navigating a section of trail at the base of a particularly massive sérac, our climber stops to rest, leaning heavily on their ice axe, gasping for air. Their hypoxia-addled brain fails to register the subtle shift in the sound of the ice, the fine shower of ice crystals that has just dusted their shoulder. A prepared climber, an experienced Sherpa, would have felt it in their bones. An instinctive alarm bell telling them to move now. But our climber is too exhausted, too focused on their own internal misery. There is a deep, resonant crack, like a giant bone snapping. A shadow falls over them, and then a block of ice the size of a bus, weighing hundreds of tons, detaches from the sérac above and collapses onto the path. It is over in less than a second. There is no scream, only the deafening roar of the avalanche as tons more ice follow, obliterating the trail and instantly erasing a human life. The mountain does not care. The Khumbu icefall is not a test of courage. It is a brutal, unforgiving filter. It exposes every flaw, every shortcut, every moment of insufficient preparation. And it does so with an impartial and final authority. Our climber's journey did not end because of one unlucky moment. It ended because their entire approach was a gamble against a house that never, ever loses. Let us imagine, for a moment, that our unprepared climber defied the odds. Let us imagine that the sérac did not fall, that through sheer, dumb luck, they managed to haul their exhausted, oxygen-starved body through the treacherous labyrinth of the Khumbu icefall. They would emerge, blinking in the dazzling, high-altitude sun, into a place of stunning and deceptive tranquility known as the Western Khwam. This vast, silent valley, a glacial bowl carved by the hands of geological time, is flanked by the towering walls of Everest, Lhotse, and Nuptse. After the constant, nerve-shredding terror of the icefall, the Khwam feels like a sanctuary. The ground is relatively flat. The objective dangers seem to have receded. And for the first time, the summit pyramid of Everest is visible in its full, majestic glory. But this sanctuary is an illusion. The Western Khwam, also known as the Valley of Silence, is a crucible. The high, snow-covered walls act like a gigantic solar reflector, turning the valley into a furnace. On a clear day, the temperature can soar to over 35 degrees Celsius, nearly 95 degrees Fahrenheit, while just a few feet away in the shade, it remains well below freezing. The unprepared climber encased in a down suit, would be cooked alive, sweating out precious bodily fluids and becoming dangerously dehydrated, a condition that thickens the blood and puts immense strain on the heart. The UV radiation, unfiltered by the thin atmosphere, is intense enough to burn exposed skin in minutes and cause a painful condition known as snow blindness, if eye protection is not constantly worn. The body, already struggling to cope with the altitude of over 6,000 meters or 20,000 feet, is now being systematically broken down by a new set of environmental tortures. Every step through the knee-deep snow of the Qom is a battle, draining the last of their meager energy reserves. At the head of the valley looms the next great barrier, the Lhotse face. This is a colossal wall of hard, blue ice rising over 1,000 meters, or nearly 4,000 vertical feet, at an angle of 40 to 50 degrees. And in some sections, it is almost vertical. This is where the true test of technical skill begins, and it is a test our climber is destined to fail. But even if they could somehow manage the physical act of climbing, they are now entering a realm where the laws of biology become absolute and unforgiving. As they ascend the fixed ropes of the Lhotse face, passing Camp 3, which is precariously carved out of the ice on a narrow ledge, they are making their way towards the threshold of the most alien environment on Earth. They are climbing into the sky itself, and as they claw their way over the top of the face and onto the wind-swept, desolate saddle of the South Col, they have officially entered the death zone. The term was coined in 1952 by a Swiss doctor named Edouard Ries-Dunant, and it is not a metaphor. It is a precise, biological definition for the altitude above 8,000 meters, roughly 26,000 feet. At sea level, the air is thick with oxygen, about 21% of every breath you take. But here, on the South Col, the barometric pressure is less than a third of what it is at sea level. This means that with every ragged, desperate gasp for air, a climber is only getting about 30% of the oxygen their body needs to survive. The human body can adapt. It can acclimatize, but only up to a certain point. The death zone is beyond that point. There is no acclimatization possible here. From the moment you step across that 8,000-meter line, your body is in a state of terminal decline. It can no longer metabolize food effectively. It cannot get enough oxygen to replenish its cells, and it cannot rest. You are on a clock, and it is ticking with terrifying speed. Every minute spent in the death zone brings you closer to your physiological breaking point. Your body is consuming itself to stay alive. For our unprepared climber, who arrived at this point already severely compromised, the effects are immediate and catastrophic. The brain, which accounts for only 2% of body weight but consumes 20% of its oxygen, begins to die. This process, hypoxia, starts subtly. Judgment, the single most important tool a climber has, is the first casualty. Simple tasks become monumentally complex. Clipping a carabiner onto a rope, a move that should be automatic, might take minutes of confused fumbling. Zipping up a jacket to protect against the savage cold becomes an insurmountable challenge. Logic evaporates, replaced by a strange, dream-like apathy, or conversely, a sudden, irrational panic. Climbers have been known to suddenly decide they are too hot and begin shedding their life-saving clothing in the sub-zero temperatures. They see visions, talk to imaginary companions. Their brain is short-circuiting, starved of the one thing it needs to function. This cognitive decay is a symptom of a far more sinister process. The lack of oxygen triggers a desperate response from the body. Blood vessels dilate to try and deliver more blood to the starved tissues. In the rigid, unyielding container of the skull, this leads to high-altitude cerebral edema, or HACE. The capillaries in the brain begin to leak fluid, and the brain itself begins to swell. The symptoms are a blinding headache, violent nausea, and a debilitating loss of coordination called ataxia. A climber with HACE will stumble and weave as if they are drunk, unable to walk a straight line. If they are not brought down to a lower altitude immediately, the only cure, the swelling will continue, crushing the brainstem, leading to a coma, and then death. At the same time, a parallel horror is unfolding in the lungs. The low oxygen pressure causes blood vessels in the lungs to constrict, dramatically increasing pressure. This forces fluid from the blood into the alveoli, the tiny air sacs where oxygen exchange takes place. This is high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE. In essence, the climber is drowning from the inside out, their own body fluids filling their lungs. The first sign is an extreme, debilitating fatigue, followed by a persistent dry cough that soon becomes a wet, gurgling rattle. A pink, frothy foam may appear on the lips. Every breath becomes a struggle, a desperate fight to draw air through a layer of fluid. Like HACE, HAPE is a swift and brutal killer. The only treatment is immediate descent. For our climber, stumbling into their tent on the desolate, wind-scoured moonscape of the South Col, these are not abstract medical risks. They are their developing reality. They are beyond exhaustion. They are in a state of cellular collapse. The bitter cold, which can plummet to -40 degrees Celsius or -40 Fahrenheit, is already attacking their extremities. Their body, in a last-ditch effort to survive, is shunting all warm blood to its core, leaving fingers and toes to freeze, harden, and die. A process known as frostbite. They are too weak and disoriented to even attempt to melt snow for water. And the dehydration they have been battling for days has reached a critical stage. They are not merely a person who is cold, tired, and out of breath. They are a biological system that is shutting down. The death zone does not need an avalanche or a fall to claim its victims. It simply waits, and it lets the immutable laws of physiology do the work. It dismantles the human machine piece by piece, starting with the mind. In the thin, frozen air of the South Col, a place where the jet stream can scour the landscape with hurricane-force winds, the line between life and death is measured in liters of oxygen and hours of daylight. Our hypothetical climber, now operating in the grip of severe hypoxia, is no longer capable of rational thought. The body's screaming alarms, the pounding headache, the rattling cough, the profound weakness are ignored, overridden by a singular, irrational obsession that has been the downfall of many. Summit fever. The peak is so close, a tantalizingly short vertical distance away, yet it might as well be on another planet. A prepared climber leaves Camp 4 with a clear understanding of their own limits, a predetermined turnaround time that is absolute, and a mastery of the complex life support system they are now entirely dependent upon. For our climber, this system is a jumble of tubes and unfamiliar hardware. The first struggle begins inside the cramped, flapping tent. Putting on the climbing gear is not a routine. It is an epic battle against their own incompetence. The down suit, a marvel of insulation designed to create a personal microclimate against the lethal cold, is incredibly bulky, turning simple movements into clumsy, exhausting wrestling matches. Then comes the oxygen apparatus. A prepared climber has practiced this for days, knowing by feel how to connect the regulator to the oxygen bottle, how to set the flow rate, typically 2 to 4 liters per minute, and how to clear the ice that will inevitably build up inside the mask from their own frozen exhalations. Our climber fumbles with the frozen metal, their thick mitts making the simple act of screwing on the regulator a near impossibility. They set the flow rate too high, wasting precious gas, then too low, starving their brain even further. They pull the mask over their face, and the cold plastic feels like a suffocating gag. The hiss of the oxygen is a lifeline, but they do not understand its fickle nature. Stepping out of the tent into the pre-dawn darkness is to step onto the surface of a hostile world. The wind is a physical presence, a solid wall that rips away body heat and drives tiny ice crystals into any millimeter of exposed skin. They begin the ascent of the first section, the triangular face, a steep slope of mixed rock and snow that leads up to a staging point known as the balcony. The climbing here is not exceptionally difficult by technical standards, but at over 8,000 meters, or 26,000 feet, it is a supreme test of efficiency. A trained mountaineer uses their legs, the largest muscles in the body, to propel them upwards. They have mastered the rest step, a rhythmic, deliberate pace where for a brief moment in each step, the leg is locked straight, allowing the skeleton, not the muscles, to bear the body's weight. They ascend the fixed ropes using their jumar, but it is a safety line and a guide, not a tool for pulling. Our climber does the opposite. In their panicked, exhausted state, they haul on the rope with their arms, burning through catastrophic amounts of energy. Their footwork is a disaster. They kick at the hard ice with their crampons, sometimes 10 times, before getting a secure purchase. They lift their knees high, a sea-level habit that is ruinously inefficient here. They are a machine running at 10% efficiency, and their fuel, oxygen, body heat, and willpower is running out fast. Hours pass. The sun rises, but it brings no warmth. Instead, it reveals the terrifying exposure of their position. They look down and see the curvature of the earth, the sky above them turning from cobalt blue to a deep, dark, violet black. They are on the very edge of space. They finally reach the balcony at 8,400 meters, or about 27,600 feet, a small, flat area where teams often pause to change oxygen bottles. A prepared climber would arrive here tired, but within their limits. They would efficiently unscrew their empty cylinder, check the gauge on the new one, and attach it, a task that takes less than a minute. Our climber collapses in the snow. Their hands are so cold they have lost all dexterity. They grapple with their oxygen bottle, their mind too clouded to perform the simple sequence of actions. Another climber from a different team has to help them, saving their life for the moment. But the delay has been costly in both time and precious body heat. From the balcony, the route continues up a long ridge to the south summit. This is where the world shrinks to the razor's edge. To their right, a staggering drop of over 2,400 meters, or 8,000 feet, down the southwest face into Nepal. To their left, an even greater void of 3,300 meters, or 11,000 feet, down the Kangshung face into Tibet. The path is a knife edge of wind-sculpted snow known as a cornice, a feature notorious for its instability. To step too far to one side is to fall into oblivion. The wind, which has been a constant enemy, now becomes a mortal threat, threatening to pluck them from the ridge at any moment. Our climbers' clumsy footwork is now a life-threatening liability. They catch a crampon point on the fabric of their own gaiter, a common mistake for novices, and they stumble, pitching sideways towards the Kangshung face. It is only the fixed rope and their ascender that jerks them to a halt, leaving them dangling, heart hammering, their body screaming with a fresh surge of adrenaline it cannot afford. They press on, driven by a primal, irrational instinct. Finally, they stand before the final gatekeeper, the Hillary Step. This legendary, near-vertical rock wall, roughly 12 meters or 40 feet high, was the last great technical challenge. While its character was changed by the 2015 earthquake, the area remains a steep, technical bottleneck that requires actual rock and ice climbing moves. It is here that the climber's utter lack of skill is laid bare. They stare at the rock, unable to see a path. They lack the basic knowledge of how to find a handhold, how to leverage their body, how to trust their feet on a small, icy ledge. There is a queue of climbers behind them, and another queue coming down. The pressure is immense. In their oxygen-starved state, they make the fatal decision. They unclip their ascender from the rope to try and move around a difficult section, intending to clip back in just a few feet higher. But in that moment, a glove, no longer nimble, slips on the icy rock. A crampon, poorly placed, scrapes and loses its purchase. There is no drama, no scream that the wind would carry away anyway. Just a quiet, clumsy slip. They fall only a few feet, but the slope here is unforgiving. They begin to slide, slowly at first, and then, with horrifying speed, tumbling down the face, a small bundle of bright color against the immense, indifferent white. Their technical ascent has ended, not because the mountain was too difficult, but because they brought a child's understanding to a place that demands the highest level of mastery. The fall from the Hillary Step was absolute. For our unprepared climber, the journey ended in a final, clumsy mistake, a testament to a complete lack of the technical skill required for survival in the vertical world. But a fatal fall born of incompetence is only one of the countless ways the mountain delivers its final judgment. For even if a climber possesses the skill of a master, the lungs of a Sherpa, and the mind of a Stoic. They remain utterly at the mercy of the mountain's most powerful and unpredictable weapon, its weather. To be on the upper slopes of Everest is to be an insignificant speck in the path of some of the most violent atmospheric forces on our planet. For most of the year, the summit of Mount Everest is uninhabitable not just for humans, but for any form of life. It is perpetually assaulted by the subtropical jet stream, a colossal, high-altitude river of air flowing from west to east at unimaginable speeds. These are not mere winds. They are relentless, invisible forces that can exceed 160 kilometers per hour or 100 miles per hour on a regular basis, with gusts recorded at over 280 kilometers per hour, which is a staggering 175 miles per hour. A human being cannot stand in such a wind. They would be picked up and hurled into the void like a discarded doll. The sound alone is a deafening, soul-shaking roar that can be heard from miles away. The climbing seasons on Everest, in the brief windows of spring and autumn, exist for one reason only. They are the periods when this ferocious rat stream, following the patterns of the Great Asian Monsoon, shifts northward. For a few precious weeks, the winds may subside, creating a fragile and temporary window of what passes for calm. The entire multi-million-dollar industry of Everest expeditions is based on waiting for this brief meteorological reprieve. An unprepared climber, arriving without this knowledge, could easily mistake a beautiful, clear day at base camp for an invitation, not realizing that just a few miles above them, the air itself is a maelstrom of lethal, unstoppable energy. Even within these climbing windows, the cold is a constant, insidious predator. The ambient temperature on the summit rarely rises above -20 degrees Celsius, which is -4 degrees Fahrenheit. More often, it hovers around -30 or -40. In the grip of the winter jet stream, it can plummet to -60 degrees Celsius, which is about -76 Fahrenheit. These are numbers that are difficult for the human mind to comprehend. At these temperatures, exposed skin freezes solid in less than a minute. Steel becomes as brittle as glass. But the number on the thermometer tells only part of the story. The true enemy is the wind chill. A 30 km/h wind, which is a relatively light breeze by Everest standards, can make a temperature of -30 feel like -50. This extreme cold doesn't just make you feel cold. It actively robs you of life. It forces the body into a desperate survival mode, constricting blood vessels in the extremities to keep the vital organs warm. This is what leads to frostbite, but it also puts a massive strain on the heart, which has to pump thick, sludgy blood through narrowed vessels. It drains a climber's energy at an alarming rate, consuming calories that are needed for warmth and movement. Without the absolute best insulated clothing and a deep understanding of how to manage heat and hydration, hypothermia is not a risk. It is a certainty. The most terrifying aspect of Everest's weather, however, is its volatility. A day that dawns with crystalline clarity and breathless calm can, in a matter of hours or even minutes, transform into a full-blown, life-threatening blizzard. The mountain literally creates its own weather. As moisture-laden air is forced up its massive flanks, it cools rapidly, condensing into thick, churning clouds that can engulf the upper slopes with shocking speed. A climber can be moving along a well-defined route one moment, and the next, they are trapped in a complete whiteout. In this condition, there is no up, no down, no horizon. The snow on the ground blends seamlessly with the snow in the air, creating a disorienting, featureless void. The fixed ropes, the only lifeline back to camp, can be buried in snow within minutes. To be caught in such a storm high on the mountain is one of the most terrifying experiences imaginable. To truly understand the speed and fury of Everest's weather, we must turn from our hypothetical climber to a true and tragic story that has become a cautionary tale for the ages: the 1996 Everest disaster. On May 10th of that year, multiple guided expeditions were making their summit push on what appeared to be a perfect day. The teams were composed of experienced guides and determined clients, but a series of small delays, traffic jams at the Hillary Step, and a few climbers who pushed past their turnaround times left many of them on the summit late in the afternoon. As they began their descent, a storm that had been brewing below, a storm that was not supposed to hit with such ferocity, slammed into the mountain. The sky turned a malevolent, bruised purple, and the world vanished into a churning vortex of snow and wind. Dozens of climbers were caught in the blizzard, trapped in the death zone. The wind screamed at over 100 kilometers per hour, or 60 miles per hour, driving the wind chill to unimaginable levels. Their headlamps were useless, their vision reduced to the few feet of swirling snow in front of them. Their oxygen supplies ran low, and the cold and hypoxia began to dismantle their minds. Rob Hall, the celebrated New Zealand guide, was trapped high on the south summit, unable to descend. In a final, heartbreaking radio call patched through to his pregnant wife in New Zealand, he told her, "I love you. Sleep well, my sweetheart. please don't worry too much. He died there on the mountain. Scott Fisher, another renowned American guide, collapsed on the descent and could not be revived. In the midst of the chaos, a group of climbers, including a Texan pathologist named Beck Weathers, became hopelessly lost just a few hundred feet from the safety of their tents at Camp 4. Battered by the storm, they collapsed in a huddle, unable to move. A guide managed to struggle back to camp for help, but by the time a rescue party could return, Weathers and another climber were deemed to be beyond help, frozen and comatose in the snow. They were left for dead, but something in Weathers refused to die. Nearly a day later, he miraculously regained consciousness. He was blind in one eye, his face a mask of black frostbite, his hands frozen solid like blocks of wood. Driven by visions of his family, he somehow staggered to his feet and, through sheer, impossible willpower, stumbled his way back to camp, shocking his fellow climbers who had already mourned his passing. Weathers survived, though he paid a terrible price, losing his nose, his right arm, and the fingers on his left hand. 8 people, many of them highly experienced, died in that storm. They were not killed by a fall or a technical mistake. They were simply erased by a force of nature that they, with all their expertise, could not overcome. If this is the fate that can befall the prepared, what hope could there be for someone who arrives at the foot of this great mountain with nothing but misguided ambition? The wrath of Everest's weather is absolute, and it is the final, unanswerable argument against the unprepared. The summit of Mount Everest is a surprisingly small, unassuming patch of snow, a wind-scoured dome no larger than a dining room table. To stand there is to stand on the roof of the world, to see the very curvature of the earth and a horizon that stretches for over 300 kilometers, or nearly 200 miles, in every direction. For the infinitesimal number of human beings who have earned the right to this view, it is a moment of profound, almost overwhelming emotion, a mixture of triumph, exhaustion, and pure, unadulterated awe. It is the culmination of years of training, of immense financial sacrifice, of weeks of grueling work on the mountain. But this moment is a fleeting and dangerous illusion. The summit is not the goal. It is only the halfway point. And in the treacherous calculus of high-altitude mountaineering, it is the less dangerous half. The vast majority of accidents, the overwhelming number of fatalities on Everest, do not occur on the way up. They happen on the descent. Let us grant our unprepared climber one final, impossible miracle. Let us imagine they did not fall from the Hillary step, that the weather held with an unnatural calm, and that through some fluke of physiology, their oxygen-starved brain did not completely shut down. Let us imagine they drag themselves onto that tiny patch of snow, the highest point on the planet. For them, this moment feels like victory. The struggle is over. They have conquered the mountain. They have achieved their goal. And this single catastrophic misunderstanding is precisely why the descent will kill them. Their guard is down. A dangerous, intoxicating sense of euphoria, amplified by hypoxia, floods their system. They linger too long, taking photos, reveling in a victory they have not truly earned. They fail to understand that every second spent here is a second closer to death. The clock that began ticking the moment they entered the death zone is now screaming its final, frantic alarm. The descent is more dangerous for a host of reasons, both psychological and physiological. First, the climber is utterly exhausted. The push to the summit has drained every last reserve of physical and mental energy. Muscles that have been pushed to their absolute limit for 12 or more hours begin to fail. Small, clumsy stumbles, easily corrected on the ascent, now become full-blown falls. The fine motor control needed to operate carabiners and ascenders is gone, replaced by a clumsy fumbling that can lead to a fatal mistake. The simple act of clipping into a safety rope, a move performed hundreds of times on the way up, can now feel like an impossibly complex task. Second, the oxygen supply is critically low. A standard rule of thumb is to save 1/3 of your oxygen for the climb up and reserve a full 2/3 for the descent and contingencies. But summit fever often leads climbers to push their limits, using more gas than planned to reach the top. Our climber, with no understanding of oxygen management, would almost certainly arrive at the summit with their tanks nearly empty. This means they must face the most treacherous parts of the climb: the Hillary step, the knife-edge ridge, the steep triangular face, with a brain and body starved of even the minimal amount of oxygen they had on the way up. The effects of hypoxia, already severe, now become exponentially worse. Vision blurs. Hallucinations become more vivid. Judgment evaporates completely. Third, gravity, which was the climber's enemy on the ascent, now becomes a treacherous and seductive friend. It is easier to go down than up, and this can lull a tired climber into a false sense of security. They move too quickly, their footwork becomes sloppy, and they fail to pay attention to the details that keep them alive. On Everest, the descent is not a walk down. It is a controlled, deliberate, and technically demanding process of rappelling and down climbing on steep, exposed terrain. The fixed ropes are essential, but they are also a point of danger. A tired climber can rig their rappel device incorrectly, lean back, expecting the rope to hold them, and simply plummet into the void. This has happened to even experienced mountaineers. In 2011, a veteran Nepali climber, after successfully summiting for the 5th time, made a simple mistake while rappelling just below the balcony and fell to his death. The mountain punishes even a moment's inattention with absolute finality. Our unprepared climber begins their descent. They are dehydrated, their throat raw from breathing supercooled, dry air. Their body has begun to consume its own muscle for fuel. The initial euphoria has worn off, replaced by a bone-deep weariness, unlike anything they have ever known. As they approach the Hillary Step, they encounter a traffic jam of climbers still on their way up. The etiquette of the mountain dictates that the descending climber has the right of way. But our climber, disoriented and impatient, decides to unclip from the rope to move around the slower party. This is the exact same mistake that could have killed them on the ascent. But now, with their coordination and judgment even further impaired, the outcome is almost certain. A misplaced step, a slip on the ice, and they are gone. But let us imagine they somehow navigate this. They continue down, their movements becoming slower and more erratic. The sun begins to set, plunging the temperature and casting long, menacing shadows across the mountain. To be caught out in the death zone after dark is a death sentence. Their headlamp, which they may have forgotten to check for fresh batteries, is now their only connection to the world, its weak beam cutting a pathetic tunnel through the immense, crushing darkness. They are now completely alone, separated from other climbers, lost in a waking nightmare. They sit down to rest, just for a moment. This is the most insidious temptation of all. The exhaustion is so complete, so overwhelming, that the idea of sleep is an irresistible siren's call. But to sleep here is to never wake up. The body's core temperature will plummet, and hypothermia will quietly and painlessly claim them. This is how so many of the bodies that now litter the upper slopes of Everest have died. They simply sat down for a final rest. The mountain is a repository of these tragedies, a vertical graveyard. The body of a climber known as Green Boots, believed to be an Indian mountaineer who perished in the 1996 storm, lay for nearly 20 years in a rock cave on the main route, a grim landmark that every climber on the north side had to pass. On the south side, the body of Scott Fisher remained for years where he collapsed. The extreme cold preserves the bodies, mummifying them in their brightly colored climbing gear, turning them into permanent, silent warnings. Our climber would become one of them. Their final moments would not be heroic. They would be a quiet, lonely slide into oblivion, a surrender to the overwhelming forces they so foolishly underestimated. They would not be a hero who died in a noble struggle, but a tourist who got lost in a place they never should have been. The final, brutal lesson of the mountain is this: reaching the summit is optional, but getting down is mandatory. And for the unprepared, there is no way down. The story of the unprepared climber, followed through each stage of this immense undertaking, always ends in the same way, regardless of the specific agent of death. The final, fatal mistake, be it a clumsy slip, a surrender to exhaustion, or a gasp in a sudden blizzard, is never the true cause. It is merely the final symptom of a failure that began months or even years earlier. In the moment, an individual looked at the highest point on earth and saw a prize to be won rather than a force to be respected. The death sentence was not passed in the thin air of the death zone. It was written in the climber's own ignorance long before they ever set foot in Nepal. A climb of Mount Everest is not a single monolithic challenge. It is a relentless cascade of lethal filters, each one designed to expose a different kind of weakness. It begins with the test of patience in the Khumbu Valley, a biological examination that a rushed and arrogant approach cannot possibly pass. For those who scrape through, the Khumbu icefall presents a test of nerve and an understanding of objective danger, a chaotic realm where only speed, experience, and luck offer a tenuous path. Higher still, the Lhotse face and the upper ridges become a rigorous technical exam, demanding a fluency in the grammar of rope and ice that cannot be faked. And woven through all of these stages is the constant, unyielding pressure of the altitude itself, a biological vice that dismantles the body and the mind, and the ever-present threat of the weather, a force of such power that it can erase the strongest and most prepared in a heartbeat. To arrive at this place without comprehensive preparation is not a brave gamble. It is a declaration of futility. It is like attempting to navigate a storm-tossed ocean without a vessel, to perform surgery without medical training, or to defuse a bomb without knowledge of its mechanism. The mountain does not recognize courage divorced from wisdom. It does not grade on a curve. Its judgment is impartial, and its verdict is delivered not with malice, but with the simple, indifferent finality of physics and physiology. The story we have followed is a testament to the fact that success on Everest is not measured by the strength in one's legs, but by the meticulousness of one's planning, the depth of one's experience, and the humility in one's heart. It is a conversation between human limitation and planetary extremity, and it demands that we come to it with our best, most disciplined, and most respectful selves. It is not a peak to be conquered, for it will always remain, long after we are gone. It remains what it has always been. Sagarmatha, the goddess of the sky, Chomolungma, the Holy Mother, a silent, beautiful, and unforgiving measure of our wisdom.